Can everybody hear me all right? Excellent. Hello, everyone. I want to say that it is my absolute privilege to be here today at SATURN again. I want to thank the organizing committee for bringing me back. I was here last year, and apparently I didn't screw up too bad, but there's still time to do that. I'm giving 2 talks this year. This is a 30-minute one on working amongst the autonomous teams, and I'm giving a 90-minute talk tomorrow about event sourcing. And I find it really interesting how I'm much more nervous about this talk, which is much shorter than the one tomorrow. I don't know quite what that is about, but hopefully I'll provide you with something useful today. I work for this company. It's called Envato. You probably haven't heard of it. You may have, but I would expect that you haven't. I want to give you a little bit of context about the company because that's the advice or the experience that I'm sharing today will be within this context. Effectively, we are a marketplace for digital creatives. So think of us as iTunes, but for all sorts of digital assets like photos or stock music or videos or website templates or something like that. We don't make any of the content that we sell, but instead we allow people to come and upload things to our site. We curate it, and then we sell it. It was founded in 2006, so it's still quite a young company. So far, we've paid out over $500 million to the people who upload things, which we're very proud of. We have about 300 staff worldwide, and about a third of that, so over 100, work in what we call the technology team. And so the technology team is everyone who reports through to our CTO. There's one software architect, or if you listen to Paolo this morning, everyone's a software architect, but there's only one who has it in their job title, and that's me. The org structure looks a little bit like this. So we have a CTO. The CTO has 4 senior engineering managers who manage teams, and I kind of sit off by the side like this. What this means is I have no direct reports. There is nobody who reports to me, and the rest of the organization don't answer to me in any way. And that's really important, and that's a distinction that we're going to be using later. We have 4 major groups. Each one of those have this senior engineering manager. And in one of the groups, there are about 3 to 8 software engineering teams. There's 23 of them all up. They're cross-functional, so everyone has a product owner, UX people, front-end, back-end, DevOps. Not every single team has front-end or DevOps or even UX, depending on their function, but all of them have a product owner and a combination of the other roles. The teams typically have 4 to 8 engineers. And every team has a team lead who is responsible for the people in that team. And every team also has a technical lead, which is usually the team lead, but can also be the senior engineer. The team lead is a job title with a position description, whereas the technical lead is more of a hat or a role that somebody in the team assumes. From my perspective as the architect, the technical lead has only one single responsibility, and that is to answer the question, why did you do it that way? That's it. Obviously, it translates to a hell of a lot more than that, but from my perspective, that's what they do. And still, there's only one software architect, and that's me. Because of our kind of like distributed nature of teams, there is no central command and control of the technology decisions. Each team is what we say is autonomous, which means that, or to us, that means that they are allowed to make their own decisions. That includes everything from technology decisions to, should we use this language or this database, or how to slice and dice services. Some teams have big monoliths, others are working with microservices, and so on. Each team is also then, accountable for their own decisions because they're the ones who make it. we like to think, we like to say that each team owns systems. We don't like the idea of having one team, or sorry, multiple teams share responsibility for a single system. We like systems to be owned by individual teams. And that includes everything from, the operational responsibility, being called at 3 a.m. if something goes wrong, maintaining budgets for those systems, et cetera, et cetera. And every system must be owned by a team. There's no system that kind of isn't owned by anyone. So when I first started this role as the software architect, I asked my boss, the CTO, what does the definition of success for me look like? And he said, it's really simple, he said, increase the number of good technical decisions that we make and reduce the number of bad technical decisions that we make. I said, okay, that doesn't sound simple at all. And it's very hard to measure, but at least it gives me an idea of what it is that I'm kind of supposed to be doing. The trick is, the key is, I don't have any authority to actually make anybody do anything. More often than not, it feels like my job is to fight entropy. Like there's 23 teams who are all operating independently of each other. They're making decisions. I'm kind of running around being driven crazy by the chaos. I've also found that I don't scale very well. Early on, I felt like I was able to keep track of what the teams were up to and what they were probably going to do next. But as we've grown, we've effectively doubled the amount of engineers that we've had since I started in this role. I'm just not able to keep track of everything that's going on anymore. Basically, this is how I find myself. But what I've realized is if I can't actually get involved in the day-to-day decisions, the only way that I can affect meaningful change is to influence the decision makers. So rather than focusing on the technology or the technology decisions, this slide probably isn't quite right. I'm still focused on technology, of course, but my primary focus is on people. I thought that by stepping into this role, I would be, I came from a team lead, development manager background. I thought by stepping into this role, I would, entertain the more technical part of me rather than the people management part of me. As I found out, this is still a people role, and that's very important. So what I have to do is I have to make all of the people in the organization to do the job for me. And seriously, that's what I try to do, is make sure that the organization in a way doesn't need me, because the function that I'm supposed to be filling, that the organization as a whole is already filling without me. So, who here have heard of the agile methodology that Spotify uses? A few, not very many. They're divided into tribes and squads and chapters and so on and so forth. We probably don't need to talk about that very much. The only thing I want to highlight is this thing in the middle here, the purple, the purple blob, which is the guild function. And so what we have done at Envato is we have created what we call an architecture guild. And that will be part of the focus of today, is the Envato Architecture Guild. So, what is the Architecture Guild? Well, it's a group of people that discuss and decides specific things, and we'll get a little bit more about what those things are later. It's a sounding board for technical decisions. So, while an architect in many organizations is somebody who you go to for advice and feedback, that's what that's part of the function of the guild. It's a forum to share knowledge and learn. And anyone who works in a technology team is welcome to participate in this guild, with one caveat, which is that some participants for some conversations are mandatory. And in those cases, I get to decide who those people are. So let's talk about the things that we do, which is kind of the agenda for for this talk. We're going to talk about transparent decision making, something that we call the light on the hill, architectural principles, sensible defaults, and strategic design. So, I want to make a couple of disclaimers before I kind of get into it. I used this in one of the workshops yesterday and got a few giggles, so I thought I'd recycle it. The plural of anecdote is not data, right? I am sharing my experience, which is an anecdote. It's worked for me, or it's something that I'm doing. It doesn't mean that it's going to work for you or in any other situation. The second thing is, I'm not standing up here and claiming that I've invented something or come up with anything new. In many cases, what we've been doing are just rehashes or recycled ideas from other people. So please don't think that I'm standing here and thinking that I've invented something that I haven't done. Let's jump into transparent decision making. So one of the things that we found was that very often we became aware of decisions after they had been made. And that was something that we struggled with, because after a decision has been made, it's much harder to change it. So now we are focusing on documenting and communicating intent. So before you've made a decision, before you've started working on something, you say, this is what I intend to do. What do you think? We have something that we call project docs, which probably needs a better name. It definitely needs a sexier name if it's going to stick. But it kind of is, kind of describes what it does, but naming is hard. Project docs is 2 to 6 pages, typically. It has a table of contents, which is a couple of paragraphs of what is this project about. Any key constraints, so the things that are leading to why are we doing this now? And do we have any timeline requirements? Do we have particular scope that must or must not be included? As well as, do we have any other pressures that are being applied onto this project? We then talk about what are the quality attributes that we are optimizing for in this project. So that could be, any of the standard quality attributes, usually a list of 3 to 5 of them. The second part, or the next part, is quality attributes that we're not optimizing for. So I think it's just as important to talk about, yes, these are the things that we're optimizing for, and these are the things that we're deliberately not doing anything about. The solution summary, which is next, is typically the biggest part of the doc. It usually contains a few diagrams, some bullet points, a number of paragraphs describing the solution that we've come up with. And lastly, but as important as anything else, is the effects on existing systems. So with all of these services and systems in place, we want to understand how this new project is going to affect existing systems all across our organization, so we understand how this fits into the broader ecosystem. We'll do questions at the end, sorry. It doesn't take very long to create these. One of the major obstacles that I got early on was people were saying, I don't know, we don't have time to write any of this down. It doesn't actually take that long. And we found that the timing of this is everything. So if you do it too early before the project is about to start, it's too early and people don't have enough context to accurately describe what it is that they're thinking. If you do it too late, then in some cases decisions have already been made. So you want to do it roughly about 1 to 2 weeks before you actually start working on the project. That's what we found to be kind of the sweet spot. To kick these ones off, I started offering ghostwriting services. So for people who are saying, we don't have time to do this, I said, that's fine. I'll sit down and I'll interview you. It'll only take half an hour. And then I will write everything down for you. That quickly became a bottleneck because those services for me doesn't scale. I had a team lead who once told me that he felt that I was more a ghost than a writer. And I said, thanks very much, I appreciate that. But it was fair. The thing is, though, it doesn't have to scale. So all I was trying to do was establish precedent. I was only trying to do a few early ones to create some templates and to share knowledge so that the teams could do this themselves. And that's kind of what we're seeing happening now. What happens is we take these docs and we put them up to the architecture guild, and anyone in the guild is free to comment, which I usually like to say that if you put 10 software developers in a room, you get 20 opinions. And so because anyone can comment, what usually happens is that everyone comments. There's a flurry of input and feedback and activity on these docs as they happen. What we really want is buy-in from technical stakeholders. So if you're building a system that other teams are going to depend on, we want to hear from those teams. We expect revisions on these docs and quick iterations. So we'll probably, in the 1 or 2 weeks before we kick off the project, we'll go through 2 or 3 iterations of these docs. If you miss your chance to comment, tough. So we're not going to hold up anything because somebody hasn't put in their comments, and that includes, even people such as the CTO. We use Google Docs for this, and that's worked incredibly well. I want to share a couple of comments that have been made in these docs. Here's somebody who has found a cyclic dependency in one of the diagrams. In this particular case, somebody is making a comment on quality attributes, which is reusability. Somebody's saying we're going to optimize for reusability. And we have another tech lead coming in saying, maybe not. In this case, I don't want to go through all of these in details, but the idea is that there are a lot of different ways that people are looking at these and saying, actually, we're building this system which might be able to give you some of the data you need. What would be the requirements for that? So we're finding out that there are a lot of good, interesting, useful conversations that are happening, and people become aware of, you're building this thing, well, we're doing this thing over here that is going to affect that. We're also experimenting with ADRs, which I won't go into details. If you want to learn more about what they are, go watch Michael Keating's talk. I think, is it tomorrow, Michael? Thursday. Cool. Second, light on the hill. We think that teams need technical visions. So the important thing here is that technical vision is not a roadmap. And this is sometimes and often confused. A light on the hill for us is our best guess of what the future looks like, not necessarily the path to get there. It's meant to guide technical decision making so that when they pick off the next project, we can get an understanding of, is this team heading in the right direction, yes or no? If no, then that's sometimes okay, but at least we're aware that we're deviating from the path, and we can make sure that we do it for all of the right reasons. And each group has their own light on the hill, which is owned by the senior engineering manager. I don't own the technical vision. They're owned by the teams, by the groups. We've had some really good results, particularly as we get product and business stakeholders involved and agreeing to these. So expressing a light on the hill has been quite interesting. We initially started out with a massive doc that had a massive diagram and lots of information, and that didn't work out well at all in the long run. It was very hard to maintain. As soon as somebody changed something, the whole document was effectively out of date and we had to refigure out everything. And there was a lot of information overload. It got to the point where even the people who were creating the documents couldn't read them anymore. So instead, we started slicing by capability. So, we have an upload function that one of the teams own. That is a capability. We had a way to pay the people who upload things. That's another capability. So we started slicing the technical visions around capabilities, and that's been super useful. We also use visual storytelling to do this. So let's talk about the anatomy of a story. Every story starts out with in the past, and then something happened. So now we are doing something so that in the future we can do this. And every one of our light on the hills are expressed in this format. So let's use a real example. I'm going to zoom through this really quickly because I'm running a little bit short on time. So we've got light on the hill for what we call federated user information. So in the beginning or in the past, we had a single product who owned all of the information about their users because we only had one product. Then we built a second product and we decided that we thought it would be a good idea to share user information between those systems. So we built a single sign-on solution. But not all of that information ended up in single sign-on. We still had user-specific information sitting in the individual products. Over time, we built more and more products who each maintain information about users. We then started building other user information sharing systems, and we needed to start, one product started to become interested in information about users that existed in other products. What we ended up with were all of these different systems, some of which we built, some of which we've bought, like Zendesk or Salesforce, that each have individual pieces of information about our users. That's kind of caused dependency issues, and all of these systems now become interconnected with each other. And so now what we're doing is we're building a system which we haven't named yet. It's called X. I'm going to just skip over that, but the idea being that we are federating all of our user information into a single source so that people can ask this one system for anything they want to know about a user rather than having to go through N other systems. The point of this presentation, or point of including this in this presentation, is that lights on the hills are not intended for technical people such as yourselves. You would have probably thought that this was a very high-level example, and it is. We build these up to get broad agreement on technical vision with our business and product owners. And this meme is something that's caught on. So now recently we had the CEO go to our product team and said, I want you to build a light on the hill for our product vision. So how do we build these? We do a workshop with some important people. We create a draft. We then share this draft, very similar to how we do with the product docs in the Architecture Guild for feedback. And once we have agreed on this, and then we share it at demos, and I go to our executive team meetings and share it there. We also then refer to them often. The next big thing that we're trying to do is we have some broad high-level principles that we want all teams to follow. So this is a little bit different from technical visions. These are broad principles. We like to have them usually 7 ± 2. We express these as value statements. They are technology pattern agnostic. And some examples could be we prefer asynchronous communication, or we keep dependencies acyclic and stable, and we define quality attributes for systems and design with them in mind. They apply to every technical decision that we make, and we use them to hold each other accountable to them. So how we did this was a little bit different. We had an anonymous suggestion box, which we then curated into a first draft. We had a deep dive discussion on every single one of them. The buy-in here was crucial because it's hard to hold people accountable to something they don't agree on, even if it's in principle. And then we published them. I'm trying to zoom through a little bit quickly, but the next thing that I wanted to talk about were sensible defaults. So over time, we often see patterns emerge across teams. Teams run into the same problems as each other, and we don't want to reinvent the wheel, which is tough in an autonomous environment. So sensible defaults is something that we have built up that are what we call off-the-shelf solution, or they are effectively off-the-shelf solutions to common problems. So examples could include API design or authentication or logging. They originate from practice, not theory, so we want to be able to experience these before we create them. We describe them as specifications, which then frequently lead to libraries. And they also include why we want to do this so that we don't miss an opportunity to teach. And that in turn also makes them easier to be challenged. So here's a quick example of, we were building lots of internal APIs, and then we created this sensible default for how we want internal APIs to communicate with each other. This then led to libraries and so on and so forth. These are recommended but never mandated. What I mean by that is you will never get into trouble for using one of these, but if you don't use them, you will be asked why you're not using them. And this is really, really important. We don't want to stymie innovation. If you think that you have a better way to do something, go and do it. And if it turns out that the thing that you did was actually better, then we can update the sensible default. The process for this is very similar to everything else. Anyone can write one. We put it up. We put it up for discussion and iteration, and then we publish them. Very, very quickly, because I know I am running out of time. A minute or two for questions. Yes. So I'll wait until last to say something a little bit maybe controversial at a software architecture conference. I believe that architecture exists to serve the needs of the business. People are laughing, so clearly it may have been controversial. I think that if we have a better architecture, it allows us to say yes, or to go faster and say yes more often to when the business wants something. And as such, I think that our architectural goals must follow the business goals and the strategic vision of the business. When the CEO, I've been in meetings with our CEO, and he says, I want to do this. He's very hands-on and product-oriented. And I say, Collis, his name is Collis, that's going to take 3 years. And he goes, okay, maybe not then. I really want to be able to say that will take 3 months or 3 weeks, but our architecture doesn't allow that always. But here's the thing, though. Sometimes I think that the shortcut is actually the right decision to make. If something isn't, not sure how to properly express this, but if something isn't necessarily, and if this is a feature that doesn't have a lot of strategic value to the business in the long term, the shortcut might be a good opportunity or a reasonable decision. In these conversations, I find myself often representing the idealistic side, because the pragmatic, the just ship it side is often very heavily championed by the product owners. But I think that there needs to be a balance, and in the tech leads, this is what I really want from them, is the balance between pragmatic and idealistic decision. So I want our tech leads to understand the business objectives and the strategy and weigh trade-offs. I've used this graph before. I think that what we as architects should focus on is the star up there in that area, which is where the complexity is high and the competitive advantage is high. And in every other case, there are other decisions that you can make. In summary, it would be easier if I could get people to do what I want them to do all the time, but it doesn't scale. So the only way that I can improve that and the controls that I could in place is by having teams accountable to each other. And sometimes these conversations are confronting. The architecture guild is where you go when your impostor syndrome has been dormant for a while. That's a real quote. Another quote is, the architecture guild is like burying your soul to the world. But if I've done my job right, we make better decisions, not because I'm involved in the decision making, but because the teams are in a better position to do it. Lights on the hill, project docs, architectural principles, sensible defaults, and being strategic. Thanks very much.